Wake up. Wake up.
Where am I? Where's Reznov?
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean?
The year is 1961. Frank Woods, Joseph Bowman, and Alex Mason. 3 men who don't exist on official records on an operation in Cuba that doesn't exist in any records. Their mission is simple: assassinate Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba. As the trio meet their Cuban contact, Carlos, at a bar, he hands over the maps and blueprints of Fidel's compound. Ironically, it used to be Carlos's plantation. But Carlos is a CIA informant working with the team. His intel, combined with their assassination and in a simultaneous air invasion, would free Cuba from Castro's rule and re-establish democracy. But as they go over the plan with Carlos, Cuban police burst in, tipped off and hunting the American intruders that aren't supposed to be in Cuba. An officer's hand, heavy with false confidence, descends towards Mason's wrist. The glint of a blade, and then a sickening wet thud as it pins the hand to the bar top. Mason and Bowman, already moving, pull their pistols, unleashing a synchronized ballet of lethal efficiency. Carlos throws Mason an M16 armed with a grenade launcher, a weapon he uses to devastating effect, as Woods busts the door off the bar into the cool Havana night, and a fight through the city streets commences. The trio carves a path of carnage, bodies, destroyed police cars, and shell casings lining the streets as the CIA team finally reaches their extraction vehicle. But it's not over yet. Cuban police are trying to corner them. As Mason drives, Woods and Bowman are leaning out the windows, firing at the blockades. The last one explodes in a fiery blossom, and then only the hum of the engine and the fading echoes of pursuit. The memory of Carlos is a fleeting ghost, receding as a crushing fatigue pulls at Mason. His vision blurs, the harsh interrogation lights eat at his eyes. The metallic tang of blood fills his mouth, and the dull ache in his temples threatens to drag him under. But then, a searing jolt of electricity rips through him, a violent awakening. His body arches, muscles scream as the darkness is torn away, forcing him to recount the next day's mission into the heart of Fidel's compound. Woods, Bowman, and Mason patiently wait in the sweltering humidity of the jungle, looking down at Fidel's compound. They're armed to the teeth with weapons from Carlos and grappling hook launchers. A 3-man kill team with one target, Fidel Castro. A red flare pierces the sky, signaling the Cuban freedom fighters' attack on the airfield outside Fidel's palace, and the start of the CIA's mission to assassinate Castro. Woods and Bowman launch their grappling hooks across, biting into the roof of a building within the compound. The trio glide across as the wind whips their face. Below, a deep canyon separates them from their target. They arrive undetected and quickly begin fighting their way through, before being forced into a full firefight with the Cuban military. Luckily, the diversion worked. The airfield is burning, pulling the heavy guard away from the main house. It's the only opening they're going to get. They fight tooth and nail through waves of Cuban soldiers, around corners, down hallways, until they finally reach Fidel's room. As Bowman covers the hall, Woods and Mason stack up on the door. The door splinters at the handles as Wood kicks it in. Fidel quickly pulls his mistress in front of him as a shield, but Alex Mason takes the shot that would have changed history. The bullet nails Castro square in the forehead, dropping him like a sack of potatoes. The supposedly defenseless woman grabs Castro's weapon, trying to shoot Woods before being finished herself, laying dead next to Castro. As Woods and Mason regroup with Bowman, they overhear on the radio from their informant Carlos. The rebel attack is failing. They need to get to the airfield immediately to escape Cuba. The rebels had taken the airfield, but they couldn't hold it for long. And forced to evacuate out the front door, the CIA team is swarmed by Cuban soldiers and armored vehicles, desperately fighting to gain a few feet. And that's when the Cuban rebels show up to help. They clear a path to a cliffside overlooking the airfield, toss down ropes, and the trio begins to repel as explosions and gunshots rock the field below. The trio is forced to rush across the runway to a stolen Cuban plane, and as the plane starts to roll down the runway, mobile anti-aircraft trucks form a blockade at the end of the runway. Without the thought of self-preservation or calculation, Alex Mason throws himself from the plane into the dirt of the tarmac. He sprints to the stationary AA gun, turning the once Cuban defense weapon into an offensive weapon, as he fires upon the blockade, destroying it and allowing Woods and Bowman to escape, but ensuring his own capture, as he's quickly thrown from the AA gun by a large Russian man and knocked out. As he comes to, he sees Fidel Castro, alive and in the flesh, talking to an older Russian man named Nikita Dragovich and the man who knocked him out, Lev Kravchenko. Mason wakes up, but not in freedom. He's a gift, a peace offering from a dictator to a monster. He isn't a soldier anymore, he's inventory, and his new owner is General Dragovich. They had killed a double, not the real Castro, and Dragovich tells him he will make Mason feel real pain, before Mason cuts back to his interrogators. Mason begins telling his interrogators the Russian was a man named Dragovich, who tortured him at a labor camp in Russia called Vorkuta. He'd been tortured for a year before being left in the prison camp to rot for yet another year. And the man who helped him find his way out was Viktor Reznov. We jump to Viktor Reznov and Alex Mason swinging punches like crazy, fighting each other with every ounce of their strength. As Reznov hits the ground, a guard rushes over to break up the fight, beating on Reznov, before Mason cracks him in the head with a stone. Together, they steal his keys and baton, igniting a riot as prisoners begin fighting their way out of the Vorkuta mines. The fight was a ruse to distract the guards, setting the prison break in motion. As the sheer number of prisoners overwhelms the guards, Reznov rallies them with the steps of the plan they have all rehearsed. Every prisoner moves to enact step 2. Along the way to the elevator, Reznov introduces Mason to Sergei, a brute of a man single-handedly fighting 2 guards simultaneously, and together they battle to the elevator, ascending out of the mine to the surface. As the doors to the frozen wastes of Vorkuta swing open, a hail of gunfire meets the first unlucky prisoners. A machine gun unloads into the crowd before the gunner is taken out by yet another prisoner. But the open plaza between them and freedom is riddled with machine gun nests. Reznov, Sergei, and Mason slam themselves into a rail car loaded with coal, using it as a rolling shield against the metallic rain pelting all around them. And then Reznov reveals their secret weapon, a slingshot armed with Molotov cocktails, which some soldiers unleash immediately, taking out the machine gun nest as they reach the end of the tracks. Step 3. Rain Fire. Mason, Sergei, and Reznov rush into the building. Sergei uses his raw strength to rip the armory door off its hinges as Reznov seizes the speaker system, broadcasting to unleash the horde. Step 4. Meanwhile, Mason heads to the roof with a slingshot team to torch the remaining guard towers. The courtyard is a slaughterhouse. Molotovs shatter against guard towers, turning snow into slush, men into torches. The air smells of burning diesel and copper blood. It's not a coordinated attack anymore. It's pure, unadulterated rage. Mason heads back down to arm himself with Reznov and Sergei, and the 3 fight forward to the next security building, where Mason climbs to the roof for step 5. Skewer the winged beast. He grabs a modified shotgun, armed with a rebar harpoon tied to a rope tied to the building itself, firing it to puncture and lash onto the helicopter overhead. As it tries to veer away, it's yanked into a nearby building, exploding in a massive blaze. They rush to the main building, fighting through enemies, but the armory door begins to drop, a massive metal slab descending from above. Sergei catches it mid-close, holding it long enough for Mason to slide through underneath. But Sergei collapses under the weight, gunned down by Russian guards. Mason lunges for the button, opening the floodgates as a stampede of prisoners surges in. Room by room is cleared in brutal close-quarters chaos, until Reznov finds a blowtorch to breach the main armory. Outmanned and outgunned, Mason fights off waves of Russian guards alongside a few remaining prisoners, who drop one by one. And finally, Reznov swings open the armory door to reveal the Death Machine minigun. Step 6. Wield a fist of iron. Mason doesn't just wield the fist, he throws punches like Mike Tyson, the minigun wiping out guards out of his way with every burst. Step 7. Raise hell. As Mason carves a path, a tear gas smoke attack hits, dropping the minigun and nearly passing out. Reznov rescues him, revealing the key to Step 8 is freedom. Motorcycles purchased in bulk by the Russian military. And now it is just Reznov and Mason, the only 2 survivors from the prison escape. Busting out of the garage and flying down the road, firing shotguns at pursuing guards, they catch up alongside a truck armed with a machine gun. As Reznov drives, Mason guns down any Russian daring to get too close. And they finally pull alongside the train. their ticket to freedom. Reznov tells Mason to jump, and Mason grabs on, yelling for Reznov to follow. But Reznov says,
Come on! Step 8, Reznov! Freedom! For you, Mason! Not for me!
Reznov pulls the truck away, crashing it into a building, allowing Mason to escape. His interrogators cut in once again, asking him how they thought the CIA could trust him after being in a Russian prison for 2 years. And he tells them they ran psychological tests on him, and they trusted him so much after all the tests, they took him to the Pentagon to meet someone very important. The Pentagon. It doesn't smell like a battlefield. It smells like floor wax and old money. Mason isn't walking in as a hero. He's being paraded in like a weapon they just took out of storage. The fluorescent lights hum, the suits whisper, and every door they pass is another secret. 1 minute he's fighting for his life, the next he's shaking hands with President John F. Kennedy. But something feels off. The air is too clean, the suits are too pressed. It's not a mission briefing, it's a chance for revenge. And Kennedy gives the order. Kill Dragovich. Mason accepts the order, but as he sits there, he hallucinates himself pulling a pistol and trying to shoot the president. Something is off, but it's not real. It's just in his head. But he hears the rest of the orders to stop the launch of the Soyuz 2 rocket that would put into space a satellite capable of spying on the United States. From the sterile warmth of the Pentagon to the desert hell of Baikonur, the wind cuts through their gear like a knife edge. This is the edge of the world. No support, no backup. Under the command of Frank Woods, the newly established CIA Special Operations Group, SOG, is deployed. They have a secret edge though, an inside man named Grigory Weaver, a Russian defector desperate to stop the missile launch. As Mason and Woods infill the base, they discover that Weaver has gone silent, no contact. And that's when they learn Lev Kravchenko, Dragovich's right-hand man, has captured him and is here in Baikonur. But they are too late. Kravchenko has Weaver. He doesn't interrogate him, he mutilates him. The knife flashes, a scream cuts through the radio static, and soon Weaver is down to just one eye. Woods and Mason don Russian soldier uniforms and regroup with the other 2 SOG members, Brooks and Bowman, who sneak into the base. The mission demands total stealth until the last possible moment. The Soviets can't know the base is under attack until the communications are cut. And first, they hit the communications building, silencing any calls for help, to killing everyone inside. But as the building is attacked, the base turns into a full war zone. Everyone is shooting at the SOG team as they climb to the roof. They spot Weaver, bound to a chair in a building across the road. Mason launches a zipline, gliding in through the window. Glass shatters, bullets fly, bodies drop, and in a blink, it's over. Weaver has been saved. His execution squad lies dead at his feet, and he's bloodied, but he's ready to help SOG stop the launch. Their target is in the control room. The obstacle is a literal mountain of rocket fuel and Soviet steel called the Soyuz 2 rocket. To get there, they have to cross a launch pad, wide open, near zero cover. With a Soyuz rocket screaming to life above them, it is a suicide run. A heated firefight erupts as they battle under the rocket's shadow. They finally fight to the control room, blowing the wall off to breach the room, but chunks of debris slam into the terminals. It is too late. The Soyuz begins to lift off. Plan B. Mason grabs a prototype rocket launcher, firing it and manually guiding the missile straight into the Soyuz, destroying it in a blinding explosion. But what goes up must come down as debris rains from the sky, crashing around the SOG team as they break for the underground tunnels. Their next objective is to hunt down Dragovich. They do so, or so Wood thinks, unleashing hell on his limo as it flees from the launch site, bursting it into a ball of flames. But there is no time to ID the bodies before Russian troops start to swarm, and it's learned quickly after. Dragovich is still alive. He didn't die in the blast because he was never in Baikonur. Meanwhile, the CIA's new computer terminal flickers to life. Instant messages routing through the secure servers, and an unexpected ping hits Hudson's screen. You don't know me, but I know Alex Mason. You will learn to trust me. Everything changes on Fridays. 2 days later, the same sender, John Trent, emails President John F. Kennedy on November 21st. You have 1 day left. Victory cannot be achieved without sacrifice. That same day, another message to Jason Hudson. Now you understand. It was by the hand of Nikita Dragovich. This is just the beginning. They are everywhere. Start at Vorkuta. 2 escaped the breakout. You know one. The other one just died. The next day, November 22nd, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. 4 days later, Hudson's terminal lights up again. A single step. Echelon, followed by a series of numbers. And then the message, her name is Evelyn Cross. Photo for your eyes only. This will be my last letter for quite some time. When the time comes, you will know what to do. We cut back to the CIA interrogator demanding if Mason confirmed the kill, if Dragovich was really dead, and Mason shakes his head no, before the questions shift to Vietnam. 5 years later, sent to hunt Russians alongside the rest of the SOG team. We jump forward 5 years to Khe Sanh. Alex Mason waits with the CIA handler Jason Hudson. They just touched down in Vietnam, hunting Russian agents embedded with the North Vietnamese army, including the mysterious Perseus and Nikita Dragovich himself. A helicopter swoops in low. Woods greets Mason with a grin, begrudgingly nodding to Hudson before giving them a tour of the base and a rundown of the situation that is called Vietnam. Until mortars scream down, slamming their vehicle off the road. They crash into the shaking dirt, and the ground quaking as the explosion rings out. Hudson is out cold. Woods and Mason are the only 2 left standing from the Jeep. They drag his limp, heavy body to a nearby trench before Alex Mason hoists him up, carrying him to a bunker. Hudson comes to as gunshots crack, mortars rock the earth, and troops scramble to defend the base. Woods starts to regroup with military command, barking that they need to secure the base before the CIA mission can start. The 3 fight waves of enemy, holding positions throughout the base long enough for the military to come in behind them and reclaim their defenses, before defending the front gate itself from half a dozen tanks, armed with nothing but a Jeep and the no longer experimental Valkyrie rocket launcher mounted on top. Woods drives as Mason guns them down, repelling the attack. And as it all starts to quiet down, Joseph Bowman swoops in on a helicopter, greeting them and welcoming them to Vietnam. Little did they know, this was the start of the Tet Offensive, and the Vietnamese push to drive the Americans back, and their target, a Russian defector in Hue City, was being overrun at this very moment. Back to the interrogation room, Alex Mason continues to get questioned, demanding he tell them why he went to Hue City, even though the CIA base had been overrun. The defector was already likely dead, and he says he just had to, before jumping back into the memory of Hue City. The CIA sent in 2 teams to Hue City. The first team was led by Frank Woods with Alex Mason and Joseph Bowman, the sole objective of getting to the CIA compound and trying to rescue the defector. The second team of Russell Adler and Lawrence Sims, the other team under the control of Hudson, would help defend Hue City and search for evidence of Russian involvement. As Woods' teams reaches the CIA compound, their helicopter was struck by a rocket, just as Woods and Mason began to rappel down, dangling by a rope, being spun in circles before being slammed through the windows of the compound, as the helicopter crashes into a ball of fire. As a North Vietnamese soldier rushes into the room, Woods slams him to a wall, disarming him and knocking him unconscious. He throws the shotgun to Alex Mason, telling him to use the Dragon's Breath shotgun rounds. A shotgun shell designed that even if you don't kill your target with the first shot, you will light them on fire and ensure their untimely and unpleasant demise. The 2 clear the compound, fighting their way through and regrouping with Bowman sliding in from a skylight in a helicopter before entering the CIA safe room, a room unfortunately already breached by the Vietnamese forces. As they split up to search rooms, Mason swings open the door, only to be immediately knocked to the ground by a Vietnamese soldier, ready to kill him before the soldier is grabbed and killed by the Russian defector, Viktor Reznov. Reznov greets Mason, telling him Dragovich is helping the North Vietnamese army and has plans for South Vietnam. When Mason asks Reznov how he escaped, he shrugs off the question, handing Mason a handful of documents and leading Mason back to his CIA SOG team. Reunited, the CIA strike team becomes a 4-man team, and they fight their way out of the complex, trying to get to the military extraction as Way City begins to fall out of American control. The streets are a blaze of explosions, bullets, and chaos as the CIA team rendezvous with Marines fighting their way to the riverbank for extraction. But the helicopter they're supposed to use is commandeered to evacuate the injured. They are forced to hold off the Vietnamese attack until a transport boat can pick them up. The defense was holding up great. Their defenses were repelling the onslaught of the Vietnamese, until a North Vietnamese tank rolled into the square they were trying to defend, shredding their defensive line. Mason calls in an airstrike on their current position, using his exact coordinates for the bomb drop. As the evac boat begins to pull up to the docks, the SOG team, accompanied by Victor Reznov, dive onto the boat as the explosions rock the square they were defending. They leave by boat before Mason is interrupted by his interrogators. They have the dossier he extracted, and they begin to question Mason about what he knew about Dragovich and the men who worked beneath him. All info that was revealed in the dossier, including Dr. Daniel Clark, a man Jason Hudson went to Kowloon, Hong Kong to investigate. As the rain pelts the side of a skyscraper, Gregory Weaver and Jason Hudson are interrogating Dr. Daniel Clark, a scientist helping out Dragovich. They're trying to get info out of him in the most brutal way possible, putting shards of glass in his mouth before punching his jaw, forcing him to bite down on the glass. He finally reveals to Hudson Weaver that he helped stabilize a chemical weapon called Nova 6 for Dragovich, and Dragovich plans to use this to attack the West in combination with something called the Numbers Program. Before he can reveal the Numbers Program info, bullets rip through the safe house windows as Daniel Clark reveals the Russians are trying to take him out as well to tie up loose ends. Gregory Weaver, Jason Hudson, and Daniel Clark are forced to team up. The only way any of them get out of this alive is together. They fight waves of Russian forces across the rooftops, through buildings, a route specifically designed by Dr. Daniel Clark for this very moment, when he knew that Dragovich would clean house. The rooftops are a blaze of gunfire, illuminating the rain, and the pops of bullets interrupt the ragged breaths as Clark leads them on his way out of Kowloon, Hong Kong. And they finally get to Clark's secret way out, a series of jumps from building to building, leading to the street, with Clark showing them where to jump, but he doesn't himself jump far enough, sliding off a roof slowly as Hudson and Weaver thud into the metal siding on the roof above him. Hudson grabs Clark at the very last moment, barely being held up himself by Weaver. He demands Clark tells him about their numbers, but as Clark begins to explain they are the key to Dragovich's plan, his head explodes from a Russian bullet. The answers remain unknown as Hudson drops his limp corpse to the ground. Weaver pulls him back up as the two fight their way down the street, jumping over alleys and sliding down a construction ramp into a pile of debris as their extract team shows up in the nick of time. We cut back to the interrogation. The two interrogators are telling Mason to go back to Vietnam, to tell them why he was hunting down Dragovich and Kravchenko. But Mason's mind goes back to Vorkuta instead, and Reznov telling Mason about why he ended up in Vorkuta and how he was betrayed by Dragovich, Steiner, and Kravchenko. The cold wastes of the Arctic tundra chill to the bone, but not as much as the events of this fateful day in 1945. World War II was over, but there was one last Nazi hideout in the Arctic Circle, and a Dr. Steiner who was among the Germans, ready to defect to Russia if the Russians freed him from Nazi control. Viktor Reznov and Dmitry Petrenko, heroes of World War II, were sent into the bitter cold and dilapidated waste to clear out the remaining Nazi soldiers and find Dr. Steiner. The slow fight to clear the base finally ends when reaching Frederick Steiner, the Nazi scientist who shoots one of his own men to escape and join the Russians. He informs Nikita Dragovich that his secret weapon, the Nova gas, is being stored in a broken shipping vessel nearby. As they travel into its depths, Kravchenko, in the meantime, is personally executing a few Nazi soldiers who had surrendered. When he runs out of bullets in his pistol, he takes a Russian soldier's knife to use instead, showing his sheer brutality. As the ship groans and creaks, Steiner leads the Russians into a large hangar of the ship where they are storing B-2 rockets, the delivery method for the deadly biological agent that he developed called Nova gas, or as it's labeled on the canisters, Nova 6. As they finally reach the storage room for Nova 6, Dragovich demands a demonstration of the new weapon by testing it on 2 batches of soldiers. First, on Dmitry Petrenko and his squad, who drive brutal deaths as their skin bubbles and they quickly fall down dead once exposed. Then, as they prepare to test it on Viktor Reznov and the 2 other soldiers in his containment cell, the ship rocks under the impact of explosion. British commandos begin attacking the freighter, hoping to take the Nova gas for themselves. As the ship shakes and buckles, the door of Reznov's cells come open. Dragovich, Steiner, and Kravchenko are all nowhere to be seen. But Reznov was determined not to let anyone have the chance to get their hands on Nova gas. He plants timed explosives on the V-2 rockets and sprints through the ship past Russians and the British, fighting each other to a single cable on the ship he uses to escape, just before the ship explodes, sinking it into the depths of the ocean. As he runs into the Arctic, we discover he was later captured and sent to Vorkuta prison by Dragovich personally. We cut back to Vorkuta, Reznov telling Alex Mason that Dragovich, Kravchenko, and Steiner all must die, before being interrupted in his memory by his interrogator, demanding Mason tell him if Viktor Reznov was still with him in Vietnam after he defected. Mason says he was, and he even survived getting shot down. We cut to Mason and Woods in a helicopter sinking in the water. Their helicopter had just been shot down, the warm, dirt-filled water of the Vietnamese swamp filling it up. They are taking fire from multiple boats. They are struggling to find the doors open, trying to escape the sinking wreck as Viktor Reznov comes to the aid of Alex Mason, helping him open the helicopter door. Mason swims to a nearby boat, taking a Vietnamese soldier hostage and turning his AK-47 on his teammates in the other boats. And after clearing the crash site, Woods and Mason sneak into a nearby fishing village, while Reznov provides overwatch from a nearby hill. They sneak through the village, planting explosives and regrouping with the rest of their SOG unit and Bowman. They split into 2 groups. Mason and Woods go through the village planting more explosives, while Bowman and his team do the same, regrouping outside the main Vietnamese army stronghold, where they have an anti-aircraft gun, the same one used to shoot them down. Mason detonates all the explosives as their SOG team begins their assault. Somewhere in this village, Lev Kravchenko, second-hand man to Nikita Dragovich, is hiding underground, helping the Vietnamese troops, but they don't know why. As they clear the village, they find the entrance to the tunnel network. Mason goes into the tunnel with a soldier named Swift to find the presence of Russians. And as they get into the tunnels, Reznov drops in to the tunnel from a hole in the ceiling, telling Mason he will clear his side of the tunnels and regroup with him and Swift on the other side. As Mason moves to catch up with Swift, Swift asks him what the hell is wrong, before being jumped by a Vietnamese soldier, instantly killing him with a knife to the neck. Mason, forced to go alone, clears the tunnels until he enters a large room with Vietnamese soldiers. A quick firefight takes place. He quickly wipes them out as Reznov jumps in from the ceiling to finish off a separate Vietnamese soldier. Together, Mason and Reznov find a secret passage blocked by some boxes and fight their way through the secret tunnels to an underground Russian command bunker. Kravchenko was here, but not anymore. He's been long gone. And on a table to the side sits a photo of Steiner, Dragovich, Kravchenko, Dmitry Petrenko, and Viktor Reznov from the Arctic tundra of 1945. Mason, now with evidence to prove the Russians were here and a new set of files he found on a table, starts to leave the tunnels, but discovers Kravchenko had booby-trapped them, rigging them to explode as he tries to leave, fighting towards the sunlight, rocks falling, bouncing off his body, dirt being thrown into his eyes. He finally pushes through a small set of rubble to a cliffside where he is rescued by Woods and Bowman in a helicopter. Mason cuts back to the interrogation, his interrogators demanding to know what happened next. Mason tells him the CIA confirmed a Soviet plane got shot down in Laos. Its cargo, Nova 6. The SOG team under Woods' command was sent to investigate, but before he could finish explaining, he yelled out in pain. His interrogators try to tell him it's a broadcast, but before they can get through to him, Mason is slipping back into his memory of what happened in Laos with the Nova 6. Taking off from a riverside base, Woods, Mason, and Bowman, alongside Reznov, all board an armed patrol boat. They blast down the river, backed up by American troops, fighting through countless defenses of NVA troops before finally running into an armored boat, a Russian boat given to the Vietnamese army. And after tens of rockets and an unholy hell of bullets, the boat finally sinks, clearing the way to where the crash site was supposed to be. However, as they near the crash site, they can't find it, until suddenly they link up with a heli unit searching for the wreck, who confirm they have found it. Atop a cliffside, the plane is burning, wrecked, damaged, but yet still intact enough for there to be something worth searching for. The four get off the boat and begin moving up towards the wreck before running into Viet Cong forces. Luckily, they were backed up by a unit of US Marines who helped push up the hill, fighting off the attacking horde soldiers before explosions rocked the battlefield, wiping out most of the Marines as a Russian Hind attack helicopter swoops in, attacking the Americans, and dropping off Russia's elite Spetsnaz. The Spetsnaz proved no problem for the Americans though. They pushed through, finally reaching the plane to discover that it was in fact carrying Nova 6 gas, but had leaked out in the crash. Luckily, completely dispersed by the time the SOG team got there. Bowman, Woods, and Mason crack open a crate, confirming that Nova 6 was being transported and finding a map to Kravchenko's lair. But as they are looking at the map, the Marines who were left help defending the crash started getting swarmed by Russian soldiers and Spetsnaz. Mason grabs a grenade launcher, Bowman a sniper rifle, and Woods his trusty M16, and together they try to defend the cockpit until Russian helicopters that had dropped off the Spetsnaz reappear, this time blowing up the aircraft wreck and throwing everyone to the ground. As Mason comes to, he sees Woods being carried away, Bowman still unconscious, and he tries to fire his pistol to discover he has no ammo. A Viet Cong soldier kicks his pistol away, and a kick that's both strong enough to disarm, but weak enough Mason knows he's being toyed with. And up walks Nikita Dragovich and Lev Kravchenko, saying,
"It's been too long, Mason. We must make up for lost time."
Before Kravchenko stomps his head, knocking him out. We jump back to Mason, strapped to the chair, his interrogator saying that with the SOG unit captured, Hudson had no choice but to continue pursuing the Nova 6 leads in Russia at Mount Yamantau, the hideout of Dr. Frederick Steiner. As Mason screams out in pain, the interrogator replies, Hudson learned about the numbers at Mount Yamantau. Hudson, Weaver, and 2 other CIA operatives are sent to Mount Yamantau in Russia, the nuclear bunker to survive all wars. But it also houses a military base with a deadly secret. They infill under a snowstorm with guidance from overhead at 80,000 feet as a SR-71 Blackbird navigates them from building to building, using stealth and the snowstorm to hide their tracks. They first destroyed interbase communication to hide their approach to the comms building, the place where they would realize communications were cut first and notify everyone else at the base. The CIA strike team descends down a sheer cliff face onto a substation of the comms building, before rappelling in through the windows and wiping out everyone in the building before their feet have ever hit the floor. The first step is done, but now the main comms building, the satellite building. Heavily defended, maintaining stealth is the priority. Using a military crossbow, Hudson silently wipes out the guards with quiet thwips before advancing on the satellite building, the main comms relay. The CIA strike team busts the door down, gunning down the scientists and soldiers held up in the room. And as they go to cut the main power, Russian reinforcements arrive, forcing them to hold off the attack. And after finally clearing all the reinforcements, Hudson, out of sheer rage, rips the power cables from the satellite comms straight out of the wall using his sheer brute strength. Doing so disables the whole building, and now finally ready to go after Steiner, the team moves to a gantry overlooking a cliff. As Weaver makes it to the other side, a soldier with her RPG shows up, blowing up the bridge, sending one of the CIA soldiers flying down into the abyss below. Hudson leaps across the bridge, but the explosion and shockwaves send out all the fresh snow on the mountain downwards in an avalanche on top of them. Desperately sprinting, they leap from a nearby cliffside, but the wind is whipping at their faces before pulling on their parachutes and gliding safely to the ground. The Nova Research Building is right in front of them, but between them and their target, truckloads of Russian troops with the sole goal of stopping the Americans and preventing them from leaving. However, the CIA trained Hudson and Weaver well as they carved through the Russians fighting to Steiner's lab, a single, solitary security complex in a hangar. As they enter and see a glass map of the United States with targets on it, their ears ring as Steiner crackles in over the radio. He wants to defect yet again, this time to the Americans to stop Dragovich from using the Nova gas in America, revealing that the gas has already been secretly hidden in the United States, but the delivery method is sleeper cells activated by a number sequence he created. And in order to get all the info to stop the attack, they need to rescue him from the Russian-controlled Rebirth Island, where he is currently being held up. As he hangs up, the Russian base troops begin flooding the hangar. The strike team is fighting through waves to a machine gun truck. Hudson turns it on the Russian soldiers in the base, but a more pressing, unstoppable threat is rolling in. The avalanche is tumbling down the mountain to their location. Weaver hotwires the truck in the nick of time as the truck guns out of the base towards the distance. Back at the interrogation, the rough voice that's been questioning Mason all day tells him Hudson learned about the numbers. They were an activation sequence for Russian sleeper cells in America. Sleeper cells that would use Nova 6 to attack the United States. But he yells at Mason that he needs him to decrypt the number codes, that he knows about the sleeper cells, that he knows what the numbers mean. When he was at Vorkuta, they programmed Mason to decrypt the numbers. But when Mason asks about Reznov, he cuts him off, asking where the broadcast station is. But Mason falls back into his memory, back into Vietnam, when he was a prisoner of war. Water, just deep enough to force you to keep your chin up, but not enough to submerge you. Filthy, in a cave, underground, hidden from the world. Woods and Mason were being kept there, forced to listen to the cries of Bowman. He had broken under torture. He was as good as dead. They pulled Mason out of the water, slamming him into a chair at a table, and on the other side, Bowman. Between them, a revolver. They tell Bowman to play, a Russian officer yelling at him, but Bowman takes his last bit of courage to insult the Russian. Bowman is clobbered in the back of the head by a metal pipe wielded by the angry Russian. His body pulled to the side, and replacing him, Frank Woods. They are being forced to play Russian roulette, spinning the barrel of a revolver until one of them is killed by the live round. Staring at each other, they make a plan, unspoken but with a few words. One shot, can't mess us up. Woods takes the gun.
You can't kill me! You shoot, GI, you shoot! Fuck!
He slides it back to Mason, who mutters clock directions of the enemies. Mason pulls the nearest Vietnamese soldier down, pulling the trigger. The live round was in the chamber, as the soldier's back explodes into red mist. Mason steals his sidearm, killing the other Vietnamese soldiers, as Woods disarms a different soldier, taking his AK-47. All the while, the Russian officer has turned tail, trying to escape. As they drop the guards, they make a plan to kill the Russian, for revenge, for Bowman. They fight through the tunnel system, chasing down the Russian soldier as he gets stuck at a wooden door. Rapid fire. Then a thunk as his body hits the floor. Mason and Woods climb out of the tunnels through the wooden door. The Russian fails to open to see a group of Russian soldiers around an attack helicopter. Mason and Woods dispatch the soldiers, stealing their helicopter, using it to unleash fury and destruction to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, destroying Vietnamese defenses and crippling their effectiveness in the region for a short time. But they run into two Russian Hinds that have been destroyed by the Marine unit backing them up at the plane wreck. Mason and Woods gun down the helis, getting double revenge in one day before landing the helicopter outside Kravchenko's Vietnam cave base. A heated fight to the entrance as the Vietnamese use a flamethrower attachment on an AK-47 to try to burn out Woods and Mason, but a few shots drop him, and Mason turns the flames back on the Vietnamese, burning a path forward. Discovering American POWs held in a concrete cage, and upon freeing them, Mason is greeted by Reznov. He says he had been taken separately to this POW camp, and that Kravchenko was here. Mason rallies the Americans alongside Woods and Reznov, fighting into the main room where Kravchenko is set up. He stands behind bulletproof glass as he sends Russian soldiers to fight off the Americans. The overwhelming might of the Americans proves too much for the Russians, and Mason and Woods bust down the door into Kravchenko's room. A chair splinters against Mason's head. Woods is disarmed and thrown into a fistfight with Kravchenko, who knocks him to the ground. Mason reaches for a pistol but is kicked away by Kravchenko, who says he should have killed Mason in Vorkuta. Then, a knife stabbed into the side as Woods presses his advantage, but Kravchenko refuses to let him take victory, pulling the pins on a grenade belt. Woods sacrifices himself, throwing himself out the window before an explosion rocks the room. Mason passes out. He comes to, with the voice of Woods asking if he's okay. Then Reznov asks if he's okay. And as the figure becomes clearer, Reznov reaches down, pulling Mason up, saying they have documents to find Steiner. He must die. The interrogator interrupts Mason, saying he killed Kravchenko, obliterated the base. He was the only survivor. When Mason tells him Reznov survived too, he had been with Mason since way back in Vorkuta. The voice coming through the speaker interrupts again, saying Mason went rogue. Mason fires back that he wasn't rogue. Steiner was there. He had to kill Steiner. But again, the interrogator asks why he had to go. Hudson and the CIA were already on the way, but Mason states Dragovich, Kravchenko, Steiner, they all had to die. The interrogator asks why he had to kill him. The CIA wanted Steiner alive, but Mason tells him the numbers were telling him to. The interrogator tells him Nova 6 is on American soil. Sleeper agents are preparing. A preemptive strike is planned on Russia to stop this. He just needs to know where the broadcast station is. But Mason says he had to kill Steiner. They had the same goal, him and Reznov, before Mason slips back into his memory of Rebirth Island. A darkened shipping container is slowly lowered to the docks of Rebirth Island. Inside, only shown by the light sneaking through the cracks, Alex Mason and Victor Reznov. They have come to Rebirth Island to kill Frederick Steiner, the Nazi scientist who invented Nova 6. They start by taking out a guard and stealing his hatchet before sneaking their way towards Steiner's lab, and just before they get there, an explosion rocks the island. The CIA, led by Jason Hudson, is attacking the island, trying to capture Frederick Steiner, and all hell breaks loose as Mason and Reznov no longer have the element of surprise, jumping down an elevator shaft, gliding down the cable to the research lab where Steiner is hiding. Reznov and Mason fight through corridors, labs, dissection tables, each one a step in the process of refining Nova 6. The Russians aren't willing to give any ground, as Reznov and Mason fight to the main research room, surrounded by scientists and soldiers alike. Finally, they clear the room, going through the security lockdown into Steiner's personal lab, and Reznov begins to beat him. Steiner tries to save himself, saying he has information about Nova, and Victor Reznov responds,
I do not care about Nova. My name is Victor Reznov. And I will have my revenge!
We then cut back to the interrogation room. His interrogators demand that Mason tells the truth, that he killed Steiner, not Reznov, but Mason swears on his life that Reznov killed Steiner. The interrogator says that can't be true. Hudson saw him execute Steiner. We jump back to 20 minutes before Steiner's death. The CIA attack is fully underway as Hudson and Weaver roll into Rebirth Island in armored vehicles, blasting away troops with 50 cal machine guns and automatic grenade launchers. That is, until the Russians destroy Hudson's armored car, forcing him and his troops to get out on foot. And as soon as they do, the Russians unleash Nova gas on them, preparing the CIA soldiers put on their protective gear, but some weren't fast enough to get their gear on. Hudson pushes to the rendezvous with Weaver, but his vehicle is blown up. Luckily, Weaver survives, only a few bruises on him. As Weaver and Hudson finally reach the room connected to Steiner's lab, they look through the glass to see Alex Mason beating on Steiner. They start breaking down the window with a nearby box just to hear Alex Mason say,
My name is Victor Reznov, and I will have my
Revenge!
Mason shoots Steiner, then Weaver, before Hudson jumps on him, knocking him out. Mason comes back, too, in the interrogation, hearing Reznov tell him he was betrayed, left to rot in Vorkuta, kept alive by vengeance, that Dragovich, Kravchenko, and Steiner all must die. As the interrogators begin to argue with one another, the Pentagon is at DEFCON 1. Mason hasn't yielded any results in breaking the numbers, and his interrogator tries one last thing. He enters the room, revealing himself as Hudson. The other interrogator is Weaver, and Hudson begins to unbind the restraints on Mason, and as he does, Mason knocks him out cold and begins stumbling down the hall. Hearing the numbers, the voices of Dragovich and Steiner, Reznov all fighting in his head as he stumbles down the halls. He sees remnants of his old missions, things that had happened to him, before finally busting down the doors to some type of scientific study room and remembering what happened to him in Vorkuta. Dragovich and Steiner tried to implant in his brain a sleeper program, as they had done with others, but his will was too strong to make him completely obedient. He resisted the implantation and was thrown into the mines with Reznov. As he stumbles down the halls, he stumbles into a conference room with all of his memories of Reznov playing on TVs and pieces of paper around the room, telling him they are brothers. They are the same, before finally stumbling into one last room, and being spun around by Hudson before catching the mother of all right hooks in Call of Duty and being knocked to the ground so hard, he flashes back to Reznov talking to him while he was strapped to the implantation table for the numbers program. When he comes back to, Hudson's standing over him with a gun, and he tells Mason the truth. Alex Mason was a failed numbers experiment by Dragovich. He didn't get turned into a sleeper cell despite all of Steiner's efforts, but seeing how pliable Mason's mind was, Reznov took advantage of this and changed the brainwashing so Alex Mason would want to kill Dragovich, Kravchenko, and Steiner instead of following their orders. He would only feel peace once they were all killed. Hudson, desperate, asked Mason to listen to the numbers again, to listen to what they are saying, and he does. He can decode the numbers. Translating the sequence, the numbers will be broadcast from a ship called the Rizalka, the same ship behind Dragovich and Castro when he was first captured. We jump to a few hours later. Mason, freshly out of interrogation, is piloting a helicopter alongside Hudson to attack the Rizalka. The ship is covered in anti-aircraft weapons, but it's no match for the miniguns and rockets of the helicopter, destroying all of the anti-air so Weaver and his team can board the ship. However, once Weaver gets down below the decks, a Russian attack helicopter swoops in, trying to shoot down Mason and Hudson. The two are able to shoot down the Russian Hind, but at the cost of their own, jumping from the helicopter, barely landing on the ship, Mason dangling by one arm as he pulls himself back up. Mason and Hudson, alongside other CIA SOG operatives, fight their way through the ship, fighting down to the bottom level where Weaver is waiting. The Rizalka was never the transmission center. It was actually an underwater base built beneath the Rizalka, a submarine base. Mason and Hudson descend down into the depths to find the base and quickly find and discover the master plan of Dragovich. He was going to broadcast his signal out on buoys that would only activate and float to the surface when he was ready to start the broadcast. The only way to stop him was to stop the broadcast from being transmitted. They climb out of the cold water into an underwater submarine bay, and the pair fight through the hallways and passages. Damaged by the Rizalka crash and the fight that had taken place overhead, the compartments were filling with water, until finally they fight to the nerve center, the brain of the operation, and Mason shuts off the broadcast from Dragovich before it can ever begin. But an explosion rocks the underwater base, sending him flying to the nearby edge, holding on to the second-story railing, just as Dragovich enters the room. He pulls a pistol on Mason, telling him he's a failed experiment and could have been his greatest asset as he aims the gun at Mason's head. Then a bullet rips through his shoulder. Hudson fired his pistol off just in the nick of time. The distraction allows Mason to pull Dragovich off a ledge, shoving him to the water, where he begins to choke him. He yells at Dragovich about how he tried to make him betray his country and kill his president. And the response by Dragovich is ominous.
I can make me kill my own president! Right?
Mason chokes him and drowns him simultaneously before busting to the exit with Hudson, swimming to the surface. With the Russian plot stopped and Dragovich dead, Mason hears Reznov's voice in his head, congratulating him on achieving what he could not. The following day, a message pops up on Hudson's terminal computer from John Trent. The first email in 5 years, titled, "You have done well. Please tell Mason one last thing. This time, it is freedom for both of us."
Step 8, Reznov! Freedom! For you, Mason! Not for me!